for you on this Monday. Industry sources are telling us here at CTV that Canada is now considering a larger fighter jet fleet, one that would include both American-made F-35s as well as the Gripen from Swedish aerospace manufacturer. CTV's Renee Rogers is covering this story and has more on why this mixed fighter force, if we can use that term, is now being considered. Renee.
That's right, Todd. Sources to CTV News tell us that the government is considering a larger fleet of fighter jets than ever before. It would be more than 100, according to sources, and the fleet would be a mixture between those American-made F-35s and the Swedish-made Gripen.
A quiet decision inside Canada could lead to one of the biggest upgrades the country's Air Force has seen in years. Instead of putting all its trust in a single fighter jet, Canada may be preparing a plan that brings together the best of two worlds. If approved, it could make the country stronger, more secure, and far harder to challenge. In June 2026, sources directly involved in discussions between Saab and the Canadian government told reporters that Canada's fighter jet procurement is no longer a question of which aircraft to buy. It has become a question of how many of each. The federal government is actively examining a mixed fleet combining American-made Lockheed Martin F-35s and Swedish-built Saab Gripen-E fighters, assembled in Canada, a total force that multiple sources describe as potentially reaching 140 aircraft. That number would give Canada the largest fighter fleet it has operated since the 1980s, when the RCAF flew 138 CF-18s. It would also commit Canada to two completely different fighter logistics systems running simultaneously for the next 30 to 40 years. There could easily be a fleet of 140 aircraft, said a source with knowledge of discussions between Saab and Ottawa. The procurement situation Canada arrived at in June 2026 is the product of a decision-making process that has been accumulating complexity for years. In January 2023, Ottawa finalized an agreement for 88 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters, valued at approximately CAD $27.7 billion, the largest single fighter procurement in Canadian history at that point. Canada is legally committed to accepting the first 16 F-35As, with deliveries expected to begin in 2026. Payments have also been initiated for components needed to build 14 additional airframes beyond the first 16. That leaves Ottawa legally committed to 16 aircraft and partially financially committed to 14 more, while the remaining 58 of the original 88 aircraft plan remain under active review. What changed between the 2023 commitment and the June 2026 re-examination is the bilateral relationship with the United States. The potential shift to a mixed fleet aims to reduce reliance on U.S. defense supply chains and political leverage while preserving core fifth-generation capabilities for NORAD and NATO operations. The trade conflict, the Permanent Joint Board on Defense pause, and the sustained instability in U.S.-Canada relations have pushed the Carney government to reconsider whether concentrating the RCAF's entire fighter fleet in a single American-manufactured aircraft, dependent on American spare parts, American software updates, American diplomatic goodwill, and American export license approvals, is an acceptable strategic risk for a country that has spent 18 months building alternatives to American dependence across every other sector of its economy. The Gripen-E is the alternative that addresses that dependence risk. Saab is negotiating with Ottawa and Bombardier over establishing Gripen fighter production in Canada, a manufacturing arrangement that would give Canada domestic control over a significant portion of its fighter fleet's supply chain. Sources say the Gripen contract alone will be the largest defense industrial project in Canadian history, supporting up to 9,000 jobs. The supply chain being developed for the Globalized Surveillance aircraft, which Canada announced the purchase of as a replacement for its NATO AWACS commitment, would feed directly into Gripen production, creating manufacturing synergies between the two Saab platforms. Two structural scenarios are being examined. The higher option, approximately 72 to 88 F-35As, and 72 Gripens, produces the 140 aircraft force. The lower option, approximately 30 F-35As and 60 Gripens, produces a 90 aircraft force more closely aligned with the original 88 jet plan in total numbers, but very different in composition and industrial footprint. Under the lower option, Canada would retain only 30 F-35 F-35 as the minimum required to maintain meaningful fifth-generation capability for the NORAD and NATO missions that require low observable, penetrating aircraft while using Gripens for the bulk of routine air defense, training, and high-tempo operations. The strategic logic of the three-layer architecture the higher option creates is coherent on paper. F-35As handle the low observable and coalition interoperability missions where stealth is operationally necessary. Gripen-Es handle fighter mass, the volume of daily air sovereignty, sorties, training flights, and conventional operations that consume the most airframe hours. GlobalEye provides airborne surveillance, maritime tracking, and battle management over northern and maritime approaches. A 140 aircraft fighter inventory would improve maintenance, rotation, training depth, alert coverage, NATO deployment capacity, and attrition planning. It would also commit Canada to 2 fighter logistics systems, one AEW and Sea Fleet, multiple software ecosystems, expanded weapon stocks, northern infrastructure, and a larger aerospace industrial base. That second sentence is where the logistics trap materializes. The F-35A and Gripen-E are built around entirely different engineering philosophies, maintenance architectures, and supply chains. The F-35 is a fifth-generation stealth aircraft with a distributed aperture system, active electronically scanned array radar, advanced electronic warfare suites, and a maintenance burden that requires specialized depot-level infrastructure, dedicated software support contracts with Lockheed Martin, and access to the F-35 Global Sustainment Network managed by the program's prime contractor. The Gripen-E is a fourth-generation plus aircraft designed around austere operations, simplified maintenance, and road basing capability that allows it to operate from dispersed locations without conventional airbase infrastructure. Its maintenance philosophy, deliberately engineered for lower crew-to-aircraft ratios and faster turnaround, is structurally incompatible with the depot maintenance model the F-35 requires. Operating both simultaneously means the RCAF would maintain 2 entirely separate pilot training pipelines. F-35 transition training runs through Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, a U.S. installation that has historically been accessible to Canadian pilots under defense cooperation agreements that the current state of U.S.-Canada relations has placed under some uncertainty. Gripen training would require establishing a Canadian-based program, likely in coordination with Saab and potentially the Swedish Air Force. 2 training pipelines mean 2 sets of flight simulators, 2 sets of instructors, 2 sets of currency and proficiency requirements, and 2 separate bases of institutional knowledge that cannot be cross-applied between platforms. The spare parts situation mirrors the training challenge. The F-35 global supply chain runs through Lockheed Martin's sustainment network, with parts sourced from the program's international consortium. Canadian companies already participate in that supply chain under existing industrial benefit arrangements. The Gripen supply chain, if production is established in Canada through the Bombardier partnership, would be managed through a separate Canadian-based industrial arrangement with Saab. Maintaining adequate spare parts inventory for 70-plus aircraft of each type simultaneously requires either 2 complete inventory systems or a hybridized approach whose operational risk increases with the complexity of managing 2 different platform requirements against a single logistics budget. Defense Minister David McGuinty confirmed in April 2026 that the government's procurement review remains active, though no final timeline has been announced.